Alright, so today we'll start with a guy named Hammurabi. It's pronounced Hammurabi. But he's going to be a ruler in Mesopotamia for roughly 40 years or so in the 1700s BC. But there are two things that he's going to do that are kind of important. The first is he's one of the first guys to really unify that area of Sumer and kind of unite all those different city-states that we talked about before break. But also he's going to be one of the first rulers to come up with a set of laws that all of his subjects or people are expected to follow. Now these sets of laws, or it was at the time it was referred to as his code, include a bunch of very harsh punishments for breaking the law. A lot of these laws are summarized as an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, meaning that whatever someone does to you, or whatever you do to someone else, the punishment is the same thing as done to you. So, for example, one of the laws was literally if you should do something that would cause someone to lose their eyesight, well, your punishment is you must lose your eyesight. But a lot of these different laws, like I said, are pretty extreme. So here's an example of a couple of them. So, for instance, one is punishment for robbery is death. If you were to hit a parent, so it says, if a son strike his father, his hand shall be hewn off. Meaning, if you were to hit your father, they cut off your hands. If you break another man's bone, his bone shall be broken. If anyone strike the body of a man higher in rank than he shall receive 60 blows with an ox whip in public. So, a lot of these things were kind of meant to prevent people from breaking the law just because they were so severe. We talked about this when we talked about governments, how I used the example if we brought back the pack. Okay, and if I said, okay, you're not allowed to chew gum, or actually let's use our mask. I think that's the example I used earlier in the year. If I catch you with your mask down around your nose, I'm going to powder you until you cry in front of the class. Well, pretty severe punishment for that, right? But how many people do you think would let their mask slip below their nose? Probably not very many, especially after they watched their classmate get paddled till they cried in front of everybody. So with a lot of these punishments, they were so severe that, gosh, you break the law once, one, you're probably going to be put to death anyway, but watching someone get whipped in public 60 times is probably going to be enough to prevent you from doing the same thing or committing the same crime. Now, we'll do more with Hammurabi later on. I just want to make sure we get through our PowerPoint today while you guys are still here. Now, keeping with the Sumerians, we talked about them a little bit with our assignment yesterday, but we watched the brain pop last week on them. But they mentioned the ziggurats, being those kind of step pyramid-shaped towers that they thought that the gods actually lived in. So, with Mesopotamia, they did have a religious system set up. They believed in many gods. There were gods for everything. Okay, there were rain gods, sun gods, wind gods, gods for the harvest. And each city-state built a temple to honor one of these specific gods. But the two most important gods that nearly every Sumerian worshiped were Enlil and Utu. Those were the rain and the sun gods. But these ziggurats were usually set up in the center of their city-state. So if you're looking at the map, you can kind of see where it's set up here in the middle. You've got the wall around the city-state, and then different temples and houses and things that would be set up around it. Yeah, so there are a couple of these that are still kind of standing. A lot of them have obviously collapsed over time. There are a handful that have been refurbished or rebuilt about 40 years ago now. So with this picture here, you can see the river here in the background. And again, like we talked about, it's nice and green here in the background. And then you've got your ziggurat here. And if you look real close, you can see the remains of the wall that would have surrounded the city-state. You've got the remains of some of the old houses and things that are still standing out here. And then you've got the bulk or the base of that ziggurat. This particular one is in Iraq. These are American troops that are walking up the staircase to it. This particular ziggurat, part of it was refurbished and rebuilt in the early 1980s, but it was never quite finished. A lot of the houses and things that you're going to see here in the picture, or the remains of them, they were not made from stone. Okay, remember we said they were made with those mud bricks? These are two guys making mud bricks. Mud bricks are still made in that part of the world today. But you can kind of see he's got a wooden mold. He's got clay and water. He literally just packs that into this mold, smooths off the top, pulls the mold off, and lets those bricks sit there for several days in the sun to dry out and harden. It's kind of just a really simple, easy way to make bricks. But don't think of them quite as mud like we have here. Think of them more as, if you've ever seen like a clay pot, think of like a solid brick made out of that clay. Okay, it's about that same hardness and everything else. It's about that same type of clay that they use. Let's do this one first. This is number 15. So for number 15, what I want you to draw is I want you to draw this pyramid. Make sure you have 3 separate parts to it. So in our top part, we have our kings, priests, and the wealthy. The middle is your skilled workers, your merchants, your farmers. And the bottom part's your slaves. So in Mesopotamia, they did have a class system. Not everyone was equal. They thought that other parts or other people were better than others. So the higher up you were on this class system, the more rights and freedoms you had, and the more that you were protected by the law. So at the very top of our class system, we got our kings and our priests. The kings and the priests in Mesopotamia usually ruled together. The kings handled the army and trading and things, while your priest handled your religious duties. Your middle group, your skilled workers, your merchants, your farmers. Okay, obviously, we all know what farmers do. Merchants are the people who sell things. Your skilled workers are the people who, those would be like your bronze smiths, your weavers, your people who made your pottery and your mud bricks and things. And at the very bottom are your slaves. Slaves, guys, were usually people who were captured from other city-states. So a lot of people will sometimes wonder, how do we know all this stuff, or how do we know about Hammurabi? How do they know what these laws were? Mesopotamians were one of the first people to really develop a writing system. Before the Mesopotamians, most people communicated in pictures. We've all heard about cave paintings or cave drawings and that kind of stuff. But with the Mesopotamians, they actually had a written language that we call cuneiform. Now, this cuneiform, I'll show you a couple of examples of it here in a second. It looks very similar to shark's teeth. Okay, it's very wedge-shaped or triangle-shaped, but there were different patterns and drawings that meant different things. That over time, people were able to translate into other languages so that it could be read. But because they were writing this stuff down, we're able to know, yes, they knew how to do basic math. Yes, they understood simple astronomy. We understand, that they had multiple gods. We know that they kept records of different trades that they did, different battles that they had. So they had special people while they existed that did all this. The average Sumerian could not read or write cuneiform. There were certain people who were allowed to go to what's called a scribe school, where they learned how to not only write in cuneiform, but how to read it also. It was usually just the children of the very wealthy who could go to these scribe schools. They were usually took place 6 days a week, all day, for years. Okay, they had thousands of different characters in cuneiform. There were thousands of different shapes or patterns of shapes that they would use. So it wasn't just a simple alphabet system like we have. So it was much more complicated than that. But here's a couple of examples of that cuneiform. But all of their writing took place on clay tablets. They did not have paper yet. So what they do is they take a hunk of clay, smooth it out as best they could, and then take a reed or a stylus, so it'd be like almost like a little stick, and press it down into the clay, and then when the clay hardened, it was ready to go. So that's why you can kind of see on both of these examples, they're kind of chipped, and it looks like they're broken. Well, it's because they're written on clay. Kind of like how when you guys were little kids, you may have rolled out your Play-Doh, like really thin, and then taken, a paper clip or something and wrote or draw in it. That's exactly what the Sumerians did with their writing. Okay, they just did it in clay. But like I said, if you kind of look at these, this one especially reminds me of shark's teeth. Like I said, there's different angles and different shapes that these kind of wedges took that represented different things. They had a spoken language, but this is how they recorded and wrote stuff down, yeah. Yes. Yep. Yeah, clay was their paper, pretty much, yeah. Yeah, they didn't have paper yet.